Welcome back to today's Photo Minute. I'm Brian Osborne, and this is the Photo Classroom, and I'm glad that you joined us again today. We're actually going to do a two-part series starting today on the whole idea of ISO. I'm going to have a little couple exercises that we can do both today and tomorrow in that series. But for those of us, especially starting out in photography, ISO is really a key core concept. After we get past the depth of field caused by the aperture and motion caused by the shutter speed, both of which we talked about last week in previous series, that it's really important to understand ISO. In fact, we put the ISO at the top of our what we call the exposure triangle, because ultimately ISO is how you're going to be able to get the certain combinations of apertures and shutter speeds that you need to accomplish the purposes that you might be trying to do in the look of the images that you're creating. ISO is ultimately the sensitivity of the camera to light, but unfortunately that doesn't always translate into something that is really helpful in our core understanding of how that relates. And so what we like to do is rephrase that in terms of the fact that the higher the ISO that you do on your camera, the higher the aperture and shutter speed combinations that you're going to be able to get under the same lighting condition. And inversely, the lower the ISO, the lower the aperture and shutter speed combinations that you're going to be able to obtain as well. The reality is that we usually can't change the amount of light in a certain situation that we choose to take pictures in. However, by raising or lowering the ISO, we can allow the camera to help us get a good combination of apertures and shutter speeds, even though the lighting situation may not be ideal for that. One of the first things I'd encourage you to do if you're new to this is make sure that you know what range of ISOs you have in your camera. We're going to talk about testing that out a little bit more as well tomorrow, but you can find the ISO button. Usually there's a dedicated button right on the camera that says ISO, and as you hold down that ISO button, you can change the numbering system, and you could actually go and see what the lowest number ISO is. Usually 100. You may have a low one, and that's a computer manipulated effect on your camera as well, but probably 100 ISO for many of us is the lowest number. And then if I raise it all the way up, depending on how new or old your camera is, this is where there's usually a huge difference. The newer cameras are going to be able to go to a much higher ISO sensitivity, and the older cameras are not going to be able to go quite as high. I think my camera goes up to 25,000 ISO, and then there are some computer manipulated numbers called high 1 and high 2 after that as well, which we will test out tomorrow. One of the things that I'd encourage you to do, and I'll post a couple pictures of me doing this as well along with this video, is just make sure you understand kind of the relationship of ISO and how the numbers can change. And so what you could do is put your camera in aperture priority mode, A or AV mode, set the aperture. If you're outside, I'd probably do something like f11, and then take a picture at 400 ISO and see what kind of shutter speed you get, or you can actually look at it through the viewfinder on the back screen. So right now mine pointed out the window says about 60th of a second. And then if I need a higher shutter speed or a faster shutter speed under the same lighting condition, and I don't want to change my aperture, what I would do is I'd raise my ISO. So if I go up to, let's say 1600 ISO, then I now get a shutter speed of about 2/50th of a second. So I'd actually have a chance of capturing a little bit more motion at the same aperture by raising my ISO under this particular lighting situation. Certainly lower light situations, nighttime situations, indoor situations are going to usually require a higher ISO. But our default ISO is usually 400, and then we're going to raise that ISO up manually if we don't see the resulting aperture and shutter speed combination that we need. A lot of people think that when you change your ISO, you're actually changing the brightness of your picture, and that's only the case if you're in manual mode. If you're in aperture priority mode or in program mode, then raising your ISO does not change the brightness of the picture. It simply gives you a better aperture shutter speed combination, which is exactly how we defined it at the beginning of this video. So my encouragement for you today is to go outside or go inside, take some pictures at maybe 100 or 400 ISO in aperture priority mode at a given aperture and see what kind of shutter speeds you get, and then raise that ISO up and see what kind of shutter speeds you get when you raise that ISO up. Once again, your picture won't be brighter or darker. You're simply changing the combination of aperture and shutter speed numbers that come up by raising your ISO or by lowering your ISO as well. I hope that's helpful, and tomorrow we're going to come back with an exercise that I think will be applicable to everybody, even if you're pretty experienced. It's all about knowing your camera, knowing what your camera's capabilities are at higher ISOs, so we'll have a little exercise for you as well tomorrow. But I'd encourage you to just take a few pictures at a low ISO, take a few pictures at a high ISO, in aperture priority mode, at the same aperture, and just make sure that it's clear in our minds, in your mind, and my mind, that by changing the ISO, we're simply changing the resulting shutter speed if we decide to operate in program mode or in aperture priority mode as well. Hey, thank you again for joining us. Please follow along on our Facebook page as well as our YouTube channel. My name is Brian Osborne. This is the Today's Photo Minute offered by the Photo Classroom. Have a great day.